what do you see as challenges with road-based autonomous vehicles and also opportunities? How can they redefine transportation, and what are the current challenges in integrating them into the mainstream transportation arena?
Autonomous vehicles, obviously, the idea behind it is that you're providing an opportunity for people to be more productive with their time. You're providing an opportunity to better control traffic. If you have autonomous vehicles, you can guide them to the route they would take. You could control their speed. You could control the speed of the vehicle as it approaches a traffic light so that it can go on green. And I think the big part to me is this idea of mobility as a service. So if you use something like a self-driving shuttle as a part of the overall integrated system, because with mass transportation, public transportation, we've always had this issue of the first and last mile. How can people get from the train station to their final destination and vice versa? But if the self-shuttle or the self-driving shuttle, I apologize, is connected to or integrated with the schedule and the bus stop and the bus station, you could have the seamless integrated transportation system. You could make public transportation more demand responsive. You can make it more flexible in terms of providing door-to-door transportation, and this would help implement or encourage this notion of mobility as a service versus owning a private car and driving your own private car. So all these are opportunities coming with autonomous vehicles, but there are many challenges as well.
I think in terms of challenges, first challenge is policy. If you get into a crash, who pays for that? Is it the company who owns the vehicle, or do you sign it off? That's a big thing. Another thing, at any point in time, a car might have to decide what is the worst scenario you choose from, whether you run off the road or hit someone. So that is another ethics question, which is a big debate. The third might be is, do you really think that people would start using less amount of vehicles or more amount of vehicles? Right now you go to office, but you don't take your laundry, or you trip chain a lot of things. In this case, the car would drop you to the office, it will go back to your place, pick up your laundry, drop the laundry to wherever it has to go to Walmart, get your stuff. So you are increasing, instead of trip chaining, now each of these trips are individual trips, and which might increase congestion, which might increase pollution as well. So how does that trip chaining affects? The other big problem which we are seeing is right now there's a move towards this deep learning algorithms where you can train a vehicle to drive like a human driver. But a lot of these things are black box. You cannot completely be sure what these things would do on every single scenario. So how do you test the system? You cannot sign it off and say that, okay, this works from 80% of the scenarios which we saw, but there are those 20% which we never saw, and it might work in some way which we cannot define right now. So that's going to be a very big challenge. How do you control the simulation of these? The tools to simulate these vehicles are really in the early stages right now, that I can build a car in simulator so that I don't have it to crash to find the first crash scenarios. So those simulation systems, would they be freely available to everyone, to academics, or would it be just these big companies which own them and they can only provide this information? Sensing itself is a issue. So all these sensors have some failure points. A LiDAR cannot look far enough. It cannot work in snow. A camera gets blinded by sunlight. Radar might not be accurate enough. We are fusing all this data to come up with full picture, but there is not a single sensor that can combine all this information. And we are still planning whether it should be autonomous or humans. There is very less efforts given towards, can it be augmented? Like, can it serve as augmentation to human drivers initially and then move towards autonomous? So if you know this person has a hearing problem, then it can provide that information in a much different way than you would provide a normal driver. It is one size fits all right now. It doesn't adapt to the driver who is driving. So I think a lot of things needs to be done. It is a very exciting field right now, and it will probably improve over time. But I think there are another few years to go before we will really start accepting.
I think, as Anuj mentioned, this whole area of testing, certification, how can you make sure that these vehicles are safe to use, and the operating environment. So maybe they would operate just well in dry weather, but if you have a snowstorm or rain, you might have issues. This is a huge area, and I think in terms of testing, Anuj mentioned a very good point. I mean, we view testing as maybe consisting of different levels. One of it is to use simulation, but we call it sometimes augmented reality. So you try to embed the human within the virtual environment that you have, something similar to what we have in a driving simulator. And this area is very interesting, and there are tools being developed as we speak, a lot of research happening in that area. So it's a very exciting time for transportation, and definitely transportation is now undergoing a transformation, a full transformation in the very full sense of the word.
And one other thing I would like to point out, even the field of deep learning itself is growing at a very fast rate. For example, if you think of a human being and deep learning emulating a human being, if I take you and I land you in England, you might have tough time to adjust from left-hand drive to right-hand drive, but humans can adjust much quicker with the less amount of data to a new condition. Whereas if I train a car in US and put it in England, within 15 minutes it might crash. So that ability in deep learning is still not achieved, where you can quickly adapt to a new system which you have not seen in the past with very few data points. So as we improve the area of deep learning itself, we might see better and better things evolving, better and better sensors coming out as well.
Excellent. You just answered my next question, which would have been about artificial intelligence and the capabilities that they currently have. But it's good to know that as deep learning gets better and better, we might have artificially intelligent systems that are able to make better decisions. So that might help also with autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, and it has been leading some of the development even now. The camera-based vehicle identification and everything has become significantly improved over time. What we used to see 10 years back, it is much more better with cheaper equipment. So that has fueled a lot of these new companies pop up.
We say now that developing self-driving systems is the mother of all AI problems, because it's a very challenging problem. And that's going back to your question about the difference between surface transportation and airline transportation. The difference is that in surface transportation, you have so many different scenarios you might encounter. Thousands of vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists, all this happening, different weather conditions, and so on. So it is definitely a very challenging problem. And the ability of the system to know the limits of its, when it would have to say, I cannot do that anymore. And how can you handle the transition between an autonomous vehicle and then a driver? That transition or handover is very hard and very challenging.
How do you make sure the driver is not watching a movie while autonomous vehicle is driving? Because it's a boring thing. If you're just sitting behind the wheel and the car keeps on driving, after a few minutes, you might fall asleep or get diverted and your brain to focus back on driving. The car hands back the control in the most critical situation, and then your brain at least takes 5 minutes to even adjust to that situation. So how do you do those things? Like the demonstration of this autonomous vehicle was done in like 90s, where in California they had a special route which was planned for platooning and stuff. If we control the environment really well, it's not a problem. The problem is the things you throw at it is much more difficult. And another example in the areas like San Francisco, if you're sitting in a car and you're not a little bit aggressive, the people would keep on crossing in front of you. So if you are an autonomous vehicle who is not being aggressive, you will just be stuck there. So you have to train the algorithm to be aggressive enough not to hit the person, but you have to make your way in some of the situations. Go back to conditions in India and China. Like, think of an autonomous vehicle driving in that situation where it would be just standing and everyone would be around it because it cannot make a legal decision. The other big problem is the problem of sudden braking. So you might have to make it less safe so that the ride is smoother. So that is the balance which these public companies would have to provide if they're actually providing these services. That, okay, if I see a curb versus if I see a stone lying on the road. So when you're driving and the road is turning and there is a curb coming, you don't want the car to start braking because people would have bad time working on that. Whereas if you see a stone lying on the road, you might want to make a swerving or decision like that. And since our spatial system are good enough, but the things can pop on, the environment is not fixed, and that is a big problem. And the industry which wants to provide a service with autonomous cars cannot be 100% safe, because then they would just stay there and it will be safe. No one would ever hit it.